Hey everyone, it's Erin from erinbunpaints. Welcome back to another acrylic painting tutorial. Today I'll be teaching you step by step how to recreate the beautiful painting beside me. It's called Cape Hatteras. The supplies needed today include 5 different paint colors. We have red, yellow, phthalo blue, black, and white. And the brushes I use today are my 3 usual brushes. We have the large flat brush, we have the medium round brush, and we have the small round brush. For once, this is not raw footage taken from a Facebook Live tutorial. This was filmed just by myself, so it's going to be edited down a little bit differently compared to our usual full-length tutorials. I'll speed up areas where I'm painting, and you can pause the video if you need more time, and I'll still go nice and slow step by step for you so that you can follow along at your own pace. If you would like to attend my next tutorial live in order to give you an opportunity to ask me questions while I teach everything step by step and to interact with other viewers who are painting along with me, you can check out my Facebook page, facebook.com/erinbunpaints. Other places to find me include Instagram. You can follow me at instagram.com/erinbunpaints, and you can also check me out on Twitch. I stream multiple times a week on Twitch, creating upcoming tutorial designs and creating some personal art, and I love chatting with people while I do it. So come hang out, twitch.tv/erinbunpaints. All right, let's get into painting. Enjoy the tutorial. Alright, we're going to start off today with our large flat brush. You can give it a dip in your paint water, a dab on your paper towel, and we're going to make a nice light blue color, just like the nice light blue sky in the background there. So we're going to be using lots of white and a little bit of blue. Welcome back to Volcano Plate, by the way, getting bigger by the day. And whenever you have your color ready, you can start by applying that all over your canvas to about 2/3 to 3/4 of the way down. 3/4 of the way down will be pretty safe just because we can always overlap with our nice sandy beach color later on. As you see, I'm going to be applying these in large horizontal strokes back and forth all the way across the canvas. Don't forget to paint up the sides and the top and eventually the bottom if you want to really get a whole completed canvas going. Something I always make sure to do when I'm laying on a big color like this is to really smooth it all out so we get a nice consistent base. So I'm just going to be wiping back and forth with my brush now that I've applied the paint to help smooth everything out and keep it as consistent as possible. Now the next step we want to move on to a little bit quick because we actually want the light blue to be a little bit wet. What I did with these clouds in the background is I added a wet on wet technique of white blending into the blue to get a really nice soft cloud look. And then I went in a little bit later when it was a little more sticky and dry just to grab a little extra white for the tops of the clouds where you can see a little bit more white and a little bit more of a highlight. So whenever you're ready, you can grab your large flat brush, you can wash it off in your water, dab on your towel or paper towel, and go into some white paint. You can take the white and you can start to stroke it back and forth, left and right on top of your wet light blue. You can see what happens is the white will blend in a little bit, but some of it will still show up. And that's exactly what we want because we want some nice wispy clouds in this background here. So I'm going to keep grabbing white paint, I'm going to throw in a few more horizontal strokes and blend them in, and then I'll go in a little bit later to touch up the tops. Okay, so while we're waiting for the sky to dry a little bit, we can go down to the sandy beach area and play with that a little bit. So I'm going to take my large flat brush, wash it off in my water, dab on my towel or paper towel, and I'll mix together this nice super light beige color. So I'm going to be using lots of white. I'm going to mix in a little bit of yellow, and then an even smaller amount of red. So there's just a teeny bit on the brush there. I find more often than not I apply a little bit too much pigment. You can already see this is turning more of like a golden yellow, borderline light orange. So if that happens to you, just grab extra white, mix it in, and you should end up with a nice sandy beige color. Something like that. Whenever you're happy with your color, you can start applying that on the bottom quarter of your canvas. Just remember that you're not leaving any gaps between the sky and the beach, so it's probably best that you start overlapping with this color on top of the blue. Just like this. The beige should cover up the blue. If you find the blue mixes a little bit with the beige, just let it sit for a couple more minutes and then apply a fresh coat of beige on top. You can see I went for more of a bumpy area for my sand along the top here, going up and down with my brush. If you'd rather have things a little bit more flat, that's totally up to you. Alright, now that we've given it some time, our sky should be pretty dry, if not maybe just a little bit sticky. If you see it's a little bit sticky or wet here and there, that's totally fine. Especially in the white areas, it might be a little bit wet. And as long as it's mostly dry, you'll be good for this next step. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to grab my medium round brush. You can dip it in your water, you can dab on your towel or paper towel, and we can go into our white paint. So the one difference with this step is that we're going to actually wipe off the white a little bit because we want it to be a little bit softer for the tops of the clouds. We don't want to be blobbing on any paint. We still want it a little bit soft on the tops. So I'm going to grab my brush now that I have white on it. I'm going to tap it off on my towel or paper towel. So you can see only a little bit of white remains. It's kind of like the bristles are coated versus having a big blob of paint on top. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on the tops of the clouds now. So I'm going to choose a spot where I have my nice white streak a little bit more prominent, so maybe like right here, for example. I'm going to take my brush, I'm going to angle it so it's about 45 degrees on the canvas, so rather than 90 or flush, I'm going to go about 45. I'm going to use the tip of my brush, and I'm going to start to swirl it. So I'm going very, very slowly in small little circles, kind of bumping my brush up and down as I do it. So I'm doing, again, small circles, also bumping my brush up and down as I go. And you can see what that's doing. It's creating a little bit of fluffiness on the top of this cloud. I'm continuing to swirl or scrape my brush as I bring it down into the existing white, and then that way it looks like it's combining into one solid cloud. I'm going to grab a little more white paint. I'm just going to dab it off, and I'm going to continue along the top edge of this white streak and just fluff up the top. Clouds come in all different shapes and sizes, but usually when I'm doing them, I kind of think of them with very fluffy tops, very round tops, and then very flat and wispy bottoms. So I'm only going to be concentrating near the top here, maybe a little in the middle if you want a little bit of extra white paint. One thing to note though is I am starting to taper down my brush strokes, so I'm starting to go down the canvas a little bit, and what I'm trying to do is kind of meet up with the other end of my white streak so that I have more of a shape to my cloud rather than just straight across. I like the clouds that have more of a fluffy middle, so I'm kind of pretending this cloud is maybe falling off of the canvas a bit. We have the tall middle, and then it's going to start to taper down into a nice little thin area at the very end here. I'm just going to continue adding a little bit of white to my brush, tapping off on my paper towel, and swirling away. A couple more things to note here. It's not totally necessary that you add fluffy tops to every single streak of white. You can definitely leave a few just on their own, and then that way they look a little more wispy, a little more delicate in the sky. And then one more thing I want to show you, if you want to really pump up the very tops of your clouds, if you really like the nice brightly highlighted tops, you can just continue to add a little more white paint to your brush, maybe tap off a little less this time, and then go back in, and you can see what a second layer does. It adds a world of a difference, a nice bright top to your clouds. I especially like doing this just kind of delicately right along the tops, and then that way the tops are very highlighted, you have a little bit of a highlighted middle, and then a very soft wispy bottom. At this point, I recommend giving your painting a little bit of time to dry. We're going to be moving on to the Lighthouse next, and that involves adding a nice white base layer, so we really want to make sure we don't have any wetness going on in the sky, and especially even at the bottom of the sand here. It'll be a lot easier if everything's a little bit more dry. Wow guys, just like when I'm painting live, I dipped my hair in the paint and I had to go off camera there to quickly wash it off. It's like I'm right here, it's like we're still together painting live. Nothing has changed. Okay, so now that our painting is a little more dry, unlike my hair, we're going to go in with our white and we're going to start to do our lighthouse. So I'm going to go back to using the nice medium round brush and I'm just going to grab some plain white to begin with. I know our lighthouse is black and white, but I like to put a nice white base down first, and then that way I can really concentrate on the black stripes a little bit later once the white has dried. So I'd recommend grabbing just a little bit of white paint kind of near the tip of the brush, and when I was painting this I started simply with just a very straight horizontal line. I wasn't worried about the shape quite yet, I just wanted to place the lighthouse on my canvas, and then that way I can slightly move it left and right by widening either from the left or the right if I want to start to move it around. I personally went for more of an offset look, so I'm going to keep it just over a little bit to the right from the center. In terms of how high up I'm going just about 3/4 of the way up the canvas. I want to make sure I'm leaving a little bit of room before I hit the top for our top part of the lighthouse, which will be in black later on. Now that I've got my first stroke on, I can start to widen out the lighthouse either again a little to the left or a little to the right, or evenly on both sides if you like your placement. The shape I'm going for is a slightly tapered shape, so the bottom of the lighthouse is going to be only slightly wider than the top. So you can do two slightly angled lines coming in from the bottom as they come up. Some more tips for some nice clean straight edges. I'd recommend using a fair amount of paint on your brush. You can see mine is quite piled there. I think a common misconception when you're doing edges is to use just a tiny amount of paint, but what I find is that actually it causes the brush to kind of grab at the canvas a little bit, it gets a little bit sticky, kind of like jumps around as you're going down. So if you have more paint, it allows the bristles to smoothly glide down as you go and to create a more consistent stroke all the way down. Sometimes a ridge of paint might form because there's a little bit of extra paint being moved around, but you can always go back with either this brush or a small brush to kind of pick up that ridge or smooth it out into the lighthouse. And in my opinion, if a little bit of a ridge exists, you're not going to see it, and it's going to be worth it for a nice clean edge as a result. To keep your line straight, I'd recommend making sure that you're positioned directly in front of your canvas, unlike me. So do as I say, not as I do. Ideally, if I wasn't teaching you today, I'd be going straight in front of the canvas like this, looking straight ahead at the canvas, and then that way I can really see where my line is going in comparison to the rest of the design. The other thing I'm doing with my brush is touching a little bit heavier, using a little bit more pressure to allow the bristles to spread out and again evenly glide down. You can see what I'm doing is I'm just watching the left-hand edge. I'm not worried about what's going on the right-hand side. I'm just looking at the left-hand side as it glides down. And then lastly, if you're like me and you have a little bit of a shaky hand as you go down, don't hesitate to rest your fist on the canvas as you go down. As long as the paint is dry, of course, you can kind of rest your fist and drag down with your brush as you go. Sometimes I use my pinky. If I am going in a wet area, I can use my pinky a little bit further away to help glide down. Or even if you have a table or an easel, you can rest your elbow on it, and then that way you're a little more steady as you go down. Alright, so once again we want to move on to the next step a little bit quick here because we actually want our white paint to still be wet. If you find it's a little bit sticky at this point, maybe you were really taking your time on your edges, just reapply a little bit of white paint, especially to that middle to right hand side, because that's the area we're going to be working in. So what I'm doing next is I'm adding just a little bit of shading on the right hand side before we go ahead and add our stripes. So I'm going to go to my plate here. I'm going to dip my medium round brush, which I've been using, a little bit into the black paint. I didn't wash my brush off, by the way. There is still white on there, and that's not a problem because we're going to be stroking on top of the white anyways. So I want you to note the small amount of black paint that I grabbed. It's just the minimal amount. If anything, I think I might even just tap off a little bit, better safe than sorry at this step. Just use a little bit less than you think. You can always add more. It's always easier to add more of a dark color rather than adding too much and then trying to dim it down with a light color. So here I go. I'm just going to use the tiny amount of black that I have on my brush. I'm going to stroke it up and down close to the right hand side of the lighthouse. I'm trying to get as close as possible to the right hand side without ruining my edge that I worked so hard on. So you can always go a little bit further in if you need to, just to make sure you're not altering that straight right hand edge. Grab a little more black if you need and just keep stroking up and down. You can see what happens is we're not leaving behind a black streak, we're leaving behind a gray streak. And that's because the white of the lighthouse is still a little bit wet, so it's mixing with the black as I apply it and creating more of just a nice light gray to medium gray finish for a nice shaded area, or nice shadow on the right hand side. You can see I'm continuing to add just a tiny amount of black paint to my brush, tapping it off on my towel, and then going back in on the right hand side and stroking up and down. This allows me to just slightly alter the shadow shade just a little bit at a time, making it slightly darker, until I find the shade that I'm looking for. The other thing that I'm starting to do is, as I stroke up and down on the right hand side, I'm starting to move a little more into the middle as well. And what that's going to do is it's going to help blend out the gray so that it's more of a smooth transition from this medium to light gray all the way back into the white. So I am trying to avoid the very left hand side, but I would say I start to stroke maybe close to the middle at points just to help blend out that edge. Keep in mind, if anything gets a little bit too dark for your liking, you could always go back in with a little bit of white and use the white to help dim things down again. Sometimes I like to add a little extra white, especially in the middle, just to really make sure everything's nicely blended and nice and smooth where it should be. Alright, just to make sure we're leaving some time for the white to dry before we go in with the black paint, just to avoid any mixing that might occur, I'm going to go up to the top of the lighthouse now and work on the black detailing. So I'm definitely going to be using my nice teeny tiny detail brush for this, the nice small round brush. Let me give you a nice close-up of the top of the lighthouse, and then that way you can really see what we're working with here. I'll still go step by step on my canvas, but if you want to take a quick screenshot or take a quick pause at this point in the video, you're more than welcome to. So what I'll be leading you through is first this base area here, so that'll just be two angled lines coming out from the lighthouse and then a slightly curved line to connect them. I will then add a large black square or black rectangle on top. You can see there's a small little ridge detail up here, so I just grab a little extra black paint, point it out on the tips here on the corners, and then do a nice horizontal line to close that up. I also put a little bit of a fence here, so all that is just a couple vertical lines going above that base, and then doing a quick couple curved lines to add the bottom detail of the fence, and then the top, of course, as well. You can see there's an extra line here and here. What those are the top edges of the gate or top edges of the fence that wrap around the lighthouse at the back. So those are going to curve down as if they're curving down and around the other way behind the lighthouse. For the top detailing here, what I'll lead you through is a couple small angled lines coming out and out from the top of this square or rectangle. We close it up with, again, another curved line, just kind of connecting all of those lines together. Before we add the vertical lines, we're going to go in and add a medium gray oval shape in the middle. This is the light bulb, which isn't turned on because it's daytime. I still thought it was important to put the light in there somewhere, so that's what the gray oval is. After we put that down, we're going to add some more black vertical lines to kind of cover that up and cage it in. And then lastly, we're going to add a little hat to the lighthouse. It's just to kind of finish it off at the top here with a little triangle shape, some little tick marks on the edges for some detail, and then a little tick mark at the top for a little antenna at the very, very tip top of the hat. Alright, so as a reminder, small detail brush, you can dip in your water, dab on your towel or paper towel, and you can go into some black paint. So we're going to start with two angled lines coming out from the top of the lighthouse here. You can go up to the left, up to the right, and you can connect those with a slightly curved line. It curves slightly up. Quick little tip for you, if you're ever wondering how tall to make something, you're a little worried about how big to make it a little smaller than you think. It's always easy to make something a little bit bigger rather than shrinking it up with some more acrylic paint once the paint dries. You can see what I've been doing is I've been moving my black slightly higher up, just a little bit at a time, creating my nice curve, connecting my two edges, and then kind of pulling back to see how it's looking, deciding if I want to make it a little bit taller or a little bit wider. The bottom, by the way, if I didn't mention it before, it's just a nice straight horizontal line. Alright, now that we have that on, we can move on to the center area above this, which is just a nice square or rectangle. So we're going to start a little further in than the edge, just to make sure we have a little bit of an overhang for our fence. You can start with two vertical lines, trying your best to keep an even amount of space on either edge of that first shape that we made, and then you can connect them with the horizontal line. Same thing, if you're a little nervous about how large to make this, start a little smaller than you think. You can always make it taller or wider if you need. Don't forget, I added a little bit of edge detailing to the two top corners, so all I'm doing is I'm taking a little bit of extra black paint on my brush. Don't forget the little edge detailing, I just added it, but I'll re-instruct it again. I just took a little extra black paint, poked it out from the two top corners on the top of a square or rectangular shape, and then pulled my brush over to connect the two with a nice straight horizontal line. Alright, so we're about to get into the fence area, so a couple tips for some nice thin straight lines. I'd recommend actually watering down your brush a little bit. I'm going to dip my brush in my water, tap on my paper towel just a little bit, and then move my bristles inside of the black paint on my plate just to water it down a little bit. I'm going to re-dip and do that again actually. I find liquefying the black just a little bit really helps with thin lines because it's thinner paint, it's not going to gloop up as much as you're trying to stroke it, and it allows you to really thin out your bristles a lot more because you can wipe on the edge of your plate and have just a very thin amount of paint because it's all watered down rather than having any blobs on the tip. So as mentioned earlier, for the fence, I just do a couple vertical lines on either side. You can use your space the way you want. If you want to fit 3 lines, 1 line, it doesn't really matter. Just use the space that you have. I think I'm going to try and fit 2 lines on either side. So I'm starting my first line a little bit inside from the very tip of the edge here. Just using the thin edge of my brush, pressing lightly, pulling down, and then I'll add a second line in the middle of that gap that I've created. I'll do the same thing on the other side. I want to connect the tops of these lines with a slightly curved line. We're trying to create another thin line that's similar or parallel to the top edge of that first shape that we made. So use that as a guide and curve along the top. I'm also going to add a curved line in the middle of these vertical lines just for some extra support. And then lastly, we have the final curved line, which is going to represent the back of the fence wrapping around the back of the lighthouse. So I'm starting from the top left corner on the left-hand side, and I'm just going to come and curve down and to the right, disappearing into that first shape. Same thing on the other side, but opposite. I'll start on the top right-hand corner, curving down to the left, disappearing into the shape. Alright, we're moving up the lighthouse now, so I'm going to start with 2 small angled lines on either side of this square or rectangle shape, just a little bit in from the outside. So leave those edges alone. We can go a little bit further in and do some very thin angled lines coming in from the sides like that. And then we can connect those with yet another slightly curved line. I'm now going to add 2 thin vertical lines just inside of these 2 angled lines, just to mark out where the box is going to be, where our light is going to be hiding. So I'm just taking my brush yet again with a small amount of slightly liquefied black paint, wiping on the edge of my plate to make sure all my bristles are lined up. And I'm going to raise my brush going up like this. Again on either side, just inside of those 2 angled lines. If it helps you, you can go ahead and close that off with a nice horizontal line right along the tops of those 2 edges. And now you have the box where your light is going to be. So to create the light, which again isn't on right now, it's just kind of resting in the middle, we can grab some white, we can grab some black and mix it together on our plate to create a nice medium gray. All I did for the light was create just a nice oval shape, kind of like an egg, resting right in the middle. It's just floating, it's not hanging onto anything. It's just kind of existing right in the middle of everything. Now that we have the light in there, we can start to close up that area with more black vertical lines. I'm going to add one more black curved line just below the top of that horizontal line there. So cutting across just above the light inside of the caged area, just for another extra detail. And then lastly, I'm going at the top of the lighthouse to add the nice triangle. So I start with a very basic triangle and then I add my little flares. So using that horizontal line that we used to close off the cage, I'm just going to do 2 angled lines coming into the middle. And then I'm going to play with the shape a little bit more just to add a little extra flair. So for example, I can use a little extra black paint on the 2 sides here just to kind of grow the triangle a little bit on the outsides to make sure that it overhangs a little bit. You can fill it in whenever you're ready if you want to see what it's looking like compared to the rest of the lighthouse. And then last but not least, I add just a very tiny vertical line on top as a little antenna. So here's my version close up again, just so you can see all those little details I added. Always remember that you can go back and fix things up if you need to. So once your black is completely dry, you can use background colors like the light blue or the white or anything else surrounding your lighthouse to clean up things like your black vertical lines, the top of the lighthouse, your fences, anything else you need to. Just make sure your black is completely dry before doing this. You don't want to create any messiness by going in when the black is even just a tiny bit wet. I would say waiting about 15 to 20 minutes is super safe for that. Alright, now that we've given some time for the white of the lighthouse to dry, we can go on and do our stripes. Let me bring this forward and talk a little bit more about the stripes for you. So the big key with the stripes, in my opinion, is realizing that they're not all completely straight lines. At the edges we have a little bit of a curve because we want to create the effect of the nice round lighthouse shape. So at the very left-hand side, for example, on the bottom of each stripe, I start to curve down to the left a little bit and then have a little bit of a nick showing where it looks like it's curling around the lighthouse. On the top, it's similar. I'm kind of curving down to the left a little bit just to make sure it's kind of curved and hiding behind the edge just as it reaches the other side. On the right-hand side, I like to curve up and to the right. You can see I create a little bit of an extra point at the top of each stripe here just to make it look like, again, it's curving around and hiding behind the edge. And then on the bottom edge, same thing, curving up and to the right, a little bit further up as I reach the edge to make it look a little more curved, again, creating that nice 3-dimensional effect. I know the stripes might be a little daunting to some. They were daunting to me, at least when I was creating this piece. Just make sure to remember that you can always really take your time with this. Take some breaks if you need to. Make sure you're always looking at the lighthouse from a distance to kind of point out if you need to extend any black stripes or extend any white stripes, and you'll be good to go. If you like the exact pattern I have here, I did start with a black stripe, so I'm going to start with a stripe that starts a little bit higher up on the right hand side and it curves down to the left as it comes. So let's go ahead and do that. So I wanted to just leave the top edge just to really show you the shape again. So on the right hand side, you can note again that the line starts to really come up rather than over to the right. It starts to come up the lighthouse as it reaches that right hand edge. And on the left hand edge, you can hardly see it, but it does do it a little bit. It kind of curves down a little bit more abruptly rather than coming across. So in the middle, you can see the stripe is relatively straight. There might be a slight curve here and there, but this is more of the 45-degree angle right in here, and then it's really just the edges that start to abruptly turn up or down. The bottom edge is the exact same. In my case, my stripe is probably going to hit the very bottom of the sand anyway, so I don't need to worry about that edge quite yet. Okay, that's one stripe, a couple more to go. Make sure you don't rest your fist into the wet paint if, again, you're trying to steady yourself. Whoops. So after I've got all my stripes on, I can reassess if anything needs fixing. So what I like to do is try my best to focus on either just the black stripes or just the white stripes and see if anything looks inconsistent. I probably could have done a better job at spacing them a little more consistently, but one thing I'm looking at here is I have this upwards curve where everything else is kind of, again, straight or curving down. So I'm gonna just make sure I fix that right now just by using my black paint and straightening out that edge here. And I think small things like that make a nice big difference. So again, take your time, evaluate your lighthouse. Grab a friend to maybe give a second opinion. That always helps in these situations. You may have noticed in the original I have just a slight amount of this medium gray on the left-hand side in the black areas of the stripes and on the top of the lighthouse. I find that gave this the extra punch to make it super 3D looking. So what you can do is take your detail brush, you can mix together a nice medium to dark gray, I would say, so mostly black with just a little bit of white. Grab just a little bit on your brush and then slowly move it left and right anywhere on that left-hand side. So I leave a little bit of a gap on the very left, and I move this dark to medium gray just a little bit to the right of that edge. You can see I'm starting pretty dark compared to the black. You could probably barely see it in the camera there. I'll try and lighten it up so you can see a little better. But that's kind of the point. You want to start a little bit dark just because you want it to be a very subtle highlight. You can always lighten it up and stack on some more lighter grays later if you need. Bring you a little closer just so you can see what I did there. You can see it's just a very subtle highlight which I added. So a very dark to medium gray. I'll show you a little closer what I did with my brush. I'm just sweeping it along with the stripe, doing a couple small horizontal to curved strokes, again anywhere in the area just over to the right of the left-hand side. And just as an extra note, I am doing this on top of the wet black paint. If you'd prefer to let it dry and do more of a dry brush look, you can do that as well. I'm going to bring you closer again just to really show you what I'm doing here. So I'm applying the wet dark to medium gray, and then to really make sure it's nice and smooth, I move my brush in between that medium gray and the black paint to help kind of blur out any edges. So I'm trying my best to kind of blend a little bit while leaving behind a little bit of that gray. Hopefully you can see that a little better now that I've tilted it. So again, moving my brush along the edges here, hoping to kind of grab a little bit of the wet black and mixing it into the gray to create a nice smooth transition into that gray highlight. I'm doing a little bit on the top area as well. I'll point out exactly where. Note that the top is probably going to be a little bit drier, right? So make sure you're using a little bit less paint and you're going for more of a dry brush look here. So you're kind of scraping the paint off, kind of like we were doing on the tops of the clouds earlier. So the areas I'm going to highlight include the left-hand edge of that first angled line we created. I'm going to go along the kind of top left-hand edge of that curved line, which was our second step earlier. And then I'm going to do a little more of a similar shading to the stripe just on this black box area here. So using a little bit of darker gray, kind of stroking a little bit left and right, and then trying to blur it out on the edges just by continuing to stroke left and right in between the black and that medium gray area. Once again, this will make that shape a little bit more rounded looking on the top. Again, hopefully you can see it there now that I've tilted it. All right, so moving on to the next few steps here, we're just going to create some long grass in the beach area. So I chose 3 colors to work with. I have more of a nice golden yellow color, which I would say is the main color of this long grass. I spliced in a little bit of kind of a green color, more of a light green I would say. And then we have a nice dark brown kind of for the base and to add some little foliage to the tops of some of the longer pieces of grass. So let's make a nice golden yellow. So it's going to be very similar to our beach color here, just a little more of the yellow and a tiny bit more of the red. That'll make it a little more of the golden range rather than the beige range. So as a reminder, we started off with lots of white. I am using the medium round brush, by the way. Grabbing some yellow, grabbing a little bit of red. You can see it makes it a little more of a golden color compared to our previous color, which is a very light beige sandy color. All right, whenever you're happy with that color, you can start to add some grass. I like to use the medium round brush because it holds a little more paint, so it allows me to do more grass at once rather than re-dipping every few seconds. And it also allows me to get more consistent strokes. Just like I was talking about before with more paint for the nice smooth edges, I want to use a little bit more paint within the bristles so that it allows for some nice, very consistent and smooth thin lines as I go. I'm also once again making sure I'm wiping the brush on my plate to make sure all the bristles are lined up as much as possible. And then when I go in, I'm going to use just a small amount of pressure and then kind of lift up near the top to allow for a nice thin tip. Let me bring you closer to show you. So I'm starting at the bottom here. I'm going to use just a little bit of pressure to bring my brush up. And then right at the top, I'm going to very quickly kind of flick off. And then that way I get a nice thin, wispy tip at the top. So here I go, I'm just going to add a bunch of this to the very top. As I mentioned before, some nice tall grass near the top. And you'll see me kind of sprinkle it down further down into the beach as I go. That one got a little high. That's okay. I'll just make a few other taller ones too. I do eventually want to go on top of the lighthouse, but my black is a little dry, so I'm going to avoid it for now. If your black is dry, you can do a few blades of grass right on top right now. So once again, you can note that I'm doing smaller blades of grass as I get further down. You can see I'm flicking a little bit quicker now. You can also see that I'm flicking a little bit quicker now just because the blades of grass are a little shorter and a little more bunched together. You can really pile them up in and amongst each other, making them crisscross and really filling up the space as much as you want. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and add some brown now. So the brown is going to be made by mixing just a little bit of black into your existing golden yellow color. You might want to go ahead and add a little bit of extra red and yellow as well, and that way it'll kind of offset the white that was pre-existing in your beige. But here's an example of the brown. So again, just a little bit of black in there. I added a little bit of extra yellow, a little bit of extra red. What you can do with the brown is just sprinkle this in amongst your golden yellow. I especially like to sprinkle it near the bottoms because that's where it's going to be a little more shaded and darker. And then of course I also like to add a little bit near the tops of some of my golden yellow longer pieces of grass just to make it look like there's a little bit of a fluffy bit up top. Let me bring you closer to see what I'm doing. I'm just using the thin edge of the brush. I'm just kind of flicking a few times near the top to give a nice little soft tip at the top there. Something else I like to do with the brown is do a couple of these horizontal strokes. It makes it look like there's maybe some little ridges in the sand, maybe some little bumps or hills. Again, I like to do this near the bottoms of the golden yellow, and sometimes in areas where there's maybe not a whole lot going on, just a couple little touches with your brush using the thin edge to make some little ridges in the sand. By the way, there's no rule that says you have to go from down to up. You can always make your blades of grass by going up to down. You might notice if you're watching closely, I'm kind of switching in between the two. There's no real reason why, there's no particular spots I'm doing that. It's just to create a little bit more variety and to give my hand a break from going from down to up. Alright, and the last color of the grass we're going to add is just a little bit of a light green. So I'm going to wash off my medium round brush again. I'm going to go back to my plate and I'm going to mix lots of yellow with just a tiny bit of blue. I personally like more of the light green look for this grass to maybe match a little bit more with the golden yellow. So again, I'm really making sure I'm piling in the yellow and only using a tiny amount of blue in my green. In terms of placement for these green blades of grass, I would say I put them pretty much everywhere in and amongst the golden yellow, nowhere in particular. Alright, so once you're done with your green, you can now reassess if you need to add any more blades of grass. I would recommend if you think you need to fill up some space, I would go back to the nice golden yellow color first, just because that's the one we use the most of. You can fill up any spaces just by adding more blades here and there. You can maybe add some more just on their own to kind of fill up the empty spaces. But more so I found when I was doing this painting, I just like to continue to pile them up close to where they already were to make it look nice and thick. After you do the golden yellow, you can always go back, re-add some brown, re-add some green, anything you need to kind of mix up the colors a little bit more and just add some variety. Okay, and then last but certainly not least, we're going to add our little birdies in the sky. We have a lighthouse, of course we need some birds flying around. So I'm switching back to my nice detail brush, my small round brush. I'm going to use the same technique as I was using for the thin lines. I'm dipping my brush into my water, swirling it a little bit into my black paint, and then wiping my brush on the edge of the plate to get a nice thin tip on my brush. And I do two different shapes for my birds. They're both pretty straightforward. I do what I call a V shape and an M shape. You can see they're pretty much a V. They have a little bit of a curve on the sides here as if their wings are kind of in the middle of flapping up. And then I have one M-shaped bird here, so these wings, they kind of come up and then back down as if he's flapping downwards. I add 5 in total. You can add as many as you like. I'm using the thin edge of the brush, choosing where to start my bird. I'm going to use the thin edge and go up to the left and then up to the right. And there's a V shape. You can make these all different sizes, make a couple that are maybe a little bit smaller. You can use a little more pressure on your brush to make some thicker wings if you want to make the birds look a little bit bigger or a little closer to you. Lots of variety you can add here. Here's the M-shaped bird if you need to see. So I'm just going to flap up a little bit. I'm just going to do a small little tick mark and immediately try and curve it or point it down on the other side. And then I'm doing the right hand side now, curving up and then back down. All right, so that completes our painting, Cape Hatteras. Thanks so much for joining me today on YouTube. Again, feel free to check me out on my other social media pages if you want to follow along live at my next tutorial or see what I'm up to. Facebook.com/erinbunpaints, Instagram.com/erinbunpaints, Twitch.tv/erinbunpaints. Okay, hope you had a great time and I'll see you at the next one.